In the vast tapestry of Norse mythology, few figures are as enigmatic, tragic, and compelling as Loki. Once, he was counted among the closest companions of Odin, celebrated as the cleverest ally of Thor, and revered as the savior of the gods in countless crises that threatened to upend the order of the realms. Yet, in the end, Loki became the gods' most dangerous enemy, the very architect of their doom, destined to lead the monstrous legions against Asgard on the day of Ragnarok. What could possibly transform a beloved friend of the gods into their ultimate betrayer? Why did Loki, who had so often chosen cunning and salvation, finally embrace destruction? The answer is not simply a tale of treachery, but a deeply human story of pain, alienation, and a yearning for acceptance that was never truly fulfilled. To understand Loki's fateful betrayal, we must journey back to his origins, to a time long before he entered the halls of Asgard. Loki was not born of the Aesir, the main family of gods. His father was Farbauti, a fearsome giant, and his mother, Laufey, was a lesser goddess. From his first breath, Loki embodied contradiction. The raw power and wildness of the giants mingled with an innate cunning and subtlety more reminiscent of the gods. Never fully one or the other, Loki was a being apart, unique in both strength and intellect, but also burdened with an unending inner conflict between those two worlds. Loki's life changed forever when Odin, the Allfather, encountered him in the frozen wastes of Jotunheim during a fierce battle with the giants. Odin did not take Loki in out of a sense of charity or paternal kindness. Rather, Odin saw in Loki a useful tool, an asset who could accomplish what the rigid honor of the Aesir could not. Loki could go where other gods could not tread, and perform deeds that others dared not attempt. So, Loki was brought to Asgard, not as a true son, but as an outsider with a purpose to serve. Even from the very beginning, Loki felt the sting of exclusion. He was tolerated, sometimes needed, but never fully embraced as an equal. The Aesir, proud and insular, saw him as a necessary evil, a being to be used in times of trouble and dismissed when peace returned. Despite his outsider status, Loki's brilliance soon became indispensable. For centuries, he was the gods' most ingenious troubleshooter, their secret weapon in crises that brute force could not resolve. When Thor's mighty hammer, Mjolnir, was stolen by the giant Thrym, it was Loki who devised the plan to recover it, even disguising himself as a bride to fool the thieves. When the gods struck a dangerous bargain with a giant builder who threatened to enslave them if he completed Asgard's walls on time, it was Loki who transformed into a mare to distract the builder's magical stallion and sabotage the work. Again and again, Loki risked humiliation and pain to save the gods, taking on roles and burdens that none of the others were willing to bear. Yet each act of heroism came at a cost. Loki's contributions were seldom met with gratitude or admiration. Instead, he was often met with suspicion, derision, and scorn. The gods saw his cunning as untrustworthy, his methods as distasteful, and his heritage as a stain on their noble ranks. The bitter truth was that Loki was only ever accepted when he was useful. When the crisis passed, he was reminded of his giant blood, of his difference, and of his perpetual status as an outsider. Odin might have called Loki brother in moments of camaraderie, but when it suited him, the Allfather would not hesitate to sacrifice Loki to protect the so-called pure gods of Asgard. The cycle of service and rejection wore Loki down. The years of being needed but never truly wanted left invisible wounds, wounds that would fester and grow. The breaking point came with the death of Baldr, the most beloved of the gods. Baldr, son of Odin and Frigg, was the shining light of Asgard, renowned for his beauty, wisdom, and kindness. When he began to have prophetic dreams of his own death, his mother Frigg traveled across the 9 worlds, extracting promises from all things not to harm her son. But in her haste, she overlooked the mistletoe, a humble plant deemed too insignificant to pose any threat. Loki, ever the seeker of secrets, discovered this omission. The motivations behind Loki's next actions are debated in the old tales, with multiple versions offering differing explanations. In one, Loki is driven by jealousy, unable to bear the adoration given to Baldr that he himself never received. In another, Loki acts because he knows Baldr's death is woven into the fabric of fate, an inevitable precursor to Ragnarok, and he merely hastens the process. In a third interpretation, Loki's actions are a cruel test, a push to see how the gods would handle true loss and tragedy. Whatever his true motive, Loki crafted a dart from mistletoe and tricked Hodr, Baldr's blind brother, into throwing it. The dart struck Baldr down, extinguishing the light of Asgard in a single, irrevocable moment. The aftermath was cataclysmic. The gods, consumed by grief and rage, turned on Loki with a ferocity that eclipsed any previous quarrel. He was no longer a brother or friend, but a mortal enemy. In a punishment as brutal as any found in myth, they seized Loki and his sons, Vali and Narfi. In a horrifying act, they transformed Vali into a wolf, who then tore his brother Narfi to pieces. The gods then used Narfi's entrails to bind Loki to jagged rocks deep within the earth. To make his torment complete, they hung a venomous serpent above his head, its poison dripping endlessly onto his face. Only his loyal wife, Sigyn, remained, holding a bowl to catch the venom. But whenever she had to empty the bowl, the poison would fall, racking Loki's body with agony so intense that even the earth itself trembled. This was more than a physical punishment. It was psychological annihilation. The gods did not merely imprison Loki, they destroyed his family, twisted his children into monsters, and erased any hope for forgiveness or redemption. The message was clear: Loki was never truly one of them, and their wrath would know no bounds. Bound in darkness, racked by unending pain, Loki was transformed. Gone was the mischievous trickster who sought acceptance and camaraderie. In his place arose a force of pure retribution. Loki had seen the true face of the gods, a face that could turn cold and monstrous when its order was threatened. He understood, with cruel clarity, that every laughter-filled feast, every shared adventure, had been conditional, a fragile illusion that shattered the moment he became inconvenient. During the long, aching years of his captivity, Loki's mind turned over the injustices he had suffered. He realized that his knowledge of the gods, their weaknesses and their secrets, was a weapon more powerful than any sword or hammer. He also knew that he was not alone in his pain. There were others, giants, monsters, and outcasts, who had been wronged by Asgard, who nursed their own grudges and yearned for vengeance. If he could unite them, Loki could challenge the gods on their own terms. When the time came, foretold in ancient prophecy, Loki broke free from his bonds. He was no longer the trickster of old, but Loki of Ragnarok, the harbinger of the end. He rallied his children, Fenrir, the monstrous wolf who had been chained by the gods in terror of his strength, Jörmungandr, the world serpent cast into the ocean, and Hel, the queen of the dead, ruling over souls the gods wished to forget. Alongside them marched the giants, the undead, and a host of creatures shunned and oppressed by Asgard. Yet, even in his role as the enemy of the gods, Loki's motivations were never simply evil for evil's sake. Some tales paint him as a sad, tragic figure, driven less by malice and more by deep despair. For Loki, Ragnarok was not meaningless destruction, but a necessary reckoning. The old world, built on exclusion, prejudice, and cycles of conditional love, had to be destroyed so that something better could rise from its ashes. Loki's ultimate rebellion was a cry against a system that could never accept him, no matter his deeds. He was a reflection of all those who have been marginalized, exploited, and cast aside by those in power. His story is a warning about the consequences of using, rather than embracing, those who are different. It is a reminder that betrayal is often born not of innate wickedness, but of wounds left untended, of love withheld, and of belonging denied. So, why did Loki turn against the gods? The answer is as complex as Loki himself. He was not born a villain, nor did he act out of simple envy or hunger for power. The seeds of his betrayal were sown in the cold soil of exclusion, watered by years of exploitation and contempt. When the gods finally revealed the limits of their acceptance, when they destroyed not just Loki, but the family and hope he had left. His path was set. Loki's rebellion was the desperate, anguished response of a soul that had been pushed too far, of a heart that had been wounded beyond repair. In the shadows of Ragnarok, as Loki leads his army against those who once called him brother, one question echoes above all. What might have been if love and acceptance had triumphed over pride and fear? The tragedy of Loki is not just his fall, but the knowledge that it was not inevitable. It was shaped by choices, by actions, and by the failure of the gods to see the value of a heart unlike their own. Thus, the story of Loki endures, not as a simple tale of good and evil, but as a timeless meditation on the price of alienation and the devastating power of rejection. It invites us to look beyond the mask of the trickster and see the pain beneath, to understand that the greatest betrayals often have the deepest roots, and that even the most fearsome enemy may be, at their core, a soul crying out for belonging that was never granted.